I'm Brock O'Hearn, the star and co-creator of the Kane comic universe.
And I'm the writer-creator, Will Meldman.
Welcome, Spillmongers. Let's take a look inside our epic fantasy action adventure comics and what you can expect inside our universe.
We provide readers with an incredibly expansive narrative dating back to 1200 BCE and the Trojan War, all the way up to modern day, and we include real mythology with our own twists.
All of our comic issues connect to the others with character crossovers across one giant linear narrative.
As an independent film producer, I love to write stories and characters inspired from a large range of mediums, including comics, books, films, TV shows, and graphic novels such as Elric.
Our goal is to show Kane's journey from an ordinary man to an epic hero. Ever since the Spider-Man No Way Home premiere, we decided to take our comic book dream and make it a reality.
We'll let the expert deep dive the story and characters, but we wanted to give you a little bit of insight into who we are and our goals with the franchise.
I'm extremely grateful to have the job I do, acting in films and shows for Netflix, HBO, Hulu, and more, but I've always been telling someone else's story, and now it's our turn to tell our own, and we couldn't be more excited to bring it to you. Thank you, Dopespill, and all you Spillmongers.
Please enjoy this special look into the Kane comic universe.
Hey guys, welcome back. So before we get started, I want to say thanks to both Will and Brock for reaching out and asking me to share the story of Kane with the Spillmonger community, as well as the rest of the world. And for me, after reading the first 3 issues, which are all available now, and I got the links in the description, but after reading the first 3 issues, I was intrigued with how on the surface, Kane is like Blade, but with werewolves. And that piqued my interest at first, but then when I read the issues and saw how deep Will Meldman also went into the history of lycanthropy and wove it into this world, and then I was like, okay, yeah, these guys are serious. So with that said, we're going to talk about the story that is told between issues 1 through 3, so that we can learn more about Kane as he begins to learn more about himself. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get your spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so with how this begins, we're shown this mysterious woman who's being chased on horseback, gunfire is being exchanged, but eventually she's able to get away from these guys by dropping a couple grenades right in front of them. But also we're told early on, with this taking place close to your modern day, is that these people live in a world where gods gamble with the lives of their creations, with them choosing to curse some and bless others, to where then after they just sit back in their heavens and tell humanity good luck with that. But as we continue, we come to find out that this woman, she's from a family who's been blessed. But on this night, she's running for her life and the hope of protecting her family blessing, as well as thousands of years of her family's history. And at this point, with her being free for the moment, we come to find out that there are more men on the way. But as she makes her way to a nearby small town, she sees the lights on the Bulldog Saloon, to where then she knocks on the door begging for someone to help her and her son. And at this point, even though the saloon was closed, a young lady by the name of Satara, she opened her doors and she told the woman to bring her child in. But with this woman bringing her child inside, it's soon after when Satara discovers that this woman is fatally wounded. But before she can get the chance to tend to the mother's wounds, the mother hands her an axe and she tells Satara that she's not gonna make it. And even still, there are more men coming for him, so Satara must protect them. And from here, the mother goes on to say that her son must know the truth. But before she can finish, she passes away. And from there, Satara promises under her breath that she will protect the child. But at this point, as Satara's leaving, she puts the mother's body in the back of the truck, she puts the baby inside, but then a couple more of these men come by, asking Satara if she's seen a rider come through. So then of course she doesn't give them any information, she just tells them the bar is closed and she's about to go. But then the dude tells this guy to check the truck, and it's here where we get to know Satara a little bit better. Because as soon as old Johnny Boy goes to look in the back of the truck, and you can tell when he does that he sees a body back there. But when this happens, Satara, she grabs the axe that the woman had gave her, and she takes out the 2 of these guys before they can even get a shot off. But then also from here, she takes their bodies as well and throws them in the back of the truck just to make sure that no one else sees them and comes asking questions, to where from there, when she makes her way back to the cabin, she burns their bodies, and after that, she gives the child's mother a proper burial. And from here, she goes on to keep her promise to protect this child, and not only by looking after him, but also she would protect him by training him well, with the hopes that one day he'll be a man that is both prudent and prepared. And soon after, Satara went on to name this child Kane. But moving forward through the course of the story, we also come to find out that Soterra's a skilled hunter, and over the years she would go on to give Kane training while also teaching Kane from a young age how all these different skills translate into life, as well as how discipline can determine his own survival. Because even from a young age, she noticed that Kane had strength and skill beyond his years. But even with this being the case, at the time Soterra made sure to teach Kane to always be mindful, because all the talent in the world will only get him so far. But as we continue, we then jump forward 25 years from the night Soterra made that promise, right into the present day, where at this point in time, little Kane is all grown up. He's a man of the woods. He's put to use much of what he's learned from Soterra as far as hunting and gathering. And on top of that, the man's impervious to split ends. Like, look at his hair. L'Oreal, come get this man. And I mean, I'm joking about the hair, but hey, we might find out one day that it's true. But for Kane, once again, he's very much a man of the woods, and we're given an example of that with him hunting a buck, taking it back to the cabin, which Soterra had handed over to him, but from there he then takes the meat over to Soterra, because again, at this point, 25 years later, Soterra is much older, and she lets Kane know that she appreciates him bringing the food by because she's much older now and she can't get out there and hunt like she used to. But from here, with Kane having to head to work, Soterra lets him know that she'll cut and marinate a couple pieces for the two of them so that they can have him later on when he gets off of work. And from here, we go over to Kane's job, which is working at the mines, and it's here we find that he's met with the news of the company's owner passing away and his son taking over. And for Kane, that isn't so much new to him since he had already read it in the paper. But what he's finding out now is that their new boss is making changes that are trickling down, like the elimination of overtime pay and double shifts for the month, and he's even added some of his own men to their crew. And later when Kane is instructed to lead a group of these guys down to the tunnels to do some demolition, with this group, it's a mixture of the new guys and his regulars, so to avoid confusion, Kane lets them know to follow his lead, he'll set the mine and he'll detonate it. But even with him making these directions clear as day, somebody still set off the detonation before Kane was out of there. But with this happening, Kane was still able to emerge from the rubble of this demolition under the mountain, and with doing so, he also noticed that he could see in the dark. And with him now further down below the demolition site, he couldn't believe what he was looking at, with it appearing to be a system of elaborate tunnels underneath this mountain, which was believed to have been tapped for decades. But after seeing this, Kane had pretty much spent the rest of his day climbing out of this tunnel in pitch black darkness, to where then he had to climb down from the mountain. But just after this, he makes his way back to the saloon, and right away Soterra is asking him what happened, because Kane is just a mess. But from here, as Kane goes on to explain to Soterra what exactly happened and what he saw, and it's also here where we see a guy leaving with a silver beard who looks a little conspicuous if you ask me, and it may be something that comes back later, not really sure, we'll just have to wait and see. But from here, Kane goes on to tell Soterra that he found something under the mountain. But with hearing this right away, she doesn't believe him, because for decades, everyone's been told that there's nothing down there, so she just hands Kane a burger that she'd made from the buck from earlier just before she heads around the back. And with Kane enjoying his meal at the bar, it's here where he's approached by a young lady who is quite flirtatious. But for Kane, after the day that he's had, he's just trying to focus on the meal, and I mean the one on his plate, in case anybody was confused. But he tells the girl that he just wants to finish his burger and his ale since he had such a long day, because for him, otherwise he would have entertained this conversation. And with hearing this, she's like, okay, cool, no worries, to where then she tells him that she'll just be over here on the side playing pool in case he changes his mind. But as she walks away, he's then like, oh, the name's Kane, it's nice to meet you. And as she leaves, she tells him that her name is McKenna. And right away with Kane, you can tell that there's some I hate to see you go, but I love to watch you leave type vibes going on. But from here, with Kane finishing his meal, he finally has a talk with Soterra where he tells her everything that happened at the mines. And for Soterra, though she's not fully convinced about what Kane has seen, she is relieved that he survived such an incident. But also with her hearing this, as well as Kane mentioning that he can see in the dark, it's here where she lets Kane know that Kane should remember his training and to remember to be the man that she'd raised him to be, almost as if she had known for some time or had some kind of idea of what this really means for Kane. But from here, she tells Kane that she'll look into it and they'll talk more about it tomorrow. But for now, Kane just needs to head home, wash up, and get some rest. And from here, we find that Kane makes his way on back to the cabin. But on this same night, Kane hears something tussling and growling in the bushes. And at first, he's kind of like, well, what the hell is that? As he should be. But then without warning, this thing jumps out. And to Kane's surprise, it's a werewolf. And for Kane, with him seeing this, initially there's still this moment of shock where he's like, what am I looking at? But almost immediately after, he readies himself to fight this thing. To where then moments later, after wrestling with the beast, he reaches for his axe and he cuts its head clean off. But then Kane rushes to the saloon to check on Soterra. But back at the saloon, we find that Kane's new boss Mr. Montclair is paying Sotera a visit, with his men telling everyone to get out. And initially he brings up Sotera's husband and how active he used to be in the worker unions for the employees of Global Corp, but quickly Sotera tells him to get to the point, and it's here where he lets her know that he doesn't want any of her influence to mess up any of his business. And in response, Sotera tells him that she's not involved with any of that anymore, if that's what he wants to hear. And he says yes, then he starts to walk out, but then his dudes start pouring gasoline all over the place. But then also around this time, it's here where Kane makes his way back to the saloon, only to then see this huge silhouette going after Sotera, but with him rushing to help, he only gets there in time to see this huge silver-streaked wolf take a bite out of her and just walk out. But with as fast as all of this is happening and the saloon on fire, there's really nothing that Kane can do aside from running into this burning saloon and rushing to Sotera's aid only just in time to see her take her last breath. And for Kane, this is like him now losing a second mother, though with Sotera it's different since she was the woman that raised him. But from here, Kane gears up and he swears on his life that he'll find the silver-streaked wolf. But before he leaves, a car pulls up, and a nice one at that, looking kinda like an Aston Martin. Or maybe a Jaguar, could be a Jag. But it's here where the gentleman steps out of the car, and he tells Kane that he is his grandfather, and he's been looking for Kane for years, with him not knowing what happened to Kane's mother years ago. But with him talking to Kane, we discover that his grandfather's name is Bert, and how he put together who Kane was and where he was because of all the recent news that's been surrounding him lately. But through the course of the talk, he convinces Kane to go back with him to his mansion, so that he can fill Kane in on his family history and really explain to Kane the whole picture, so that Kane can truly understand his significance. And from here, Kane's grandfather explains the backstory of all this. And it gets crazy, because from here he leads Kane through a secret stairway, and as they make their way through, he begins to explain to Kane how he's a descendant of a family tree that dates back to the gods themselves. And he begins this by showing Kane Athena and telling him how she created the stars in the heavens that fall to the earth and provide silver, which was then later used by Achilles to face his enemies in the war against Troy. And as he continues to tell this story to Kane, he also lets him know that Achilles was born a werewolf, but for Achilles at a young age, his mother dipped him into the river Styx to rid him from having to transform into an actual beast. But even with Achilles being cleansed, and that cleansing keeping him from having to transform or thirst for human flesh, he still retained his weakness to silver. But as it stands for their family, to this day they have yet to discover who cursed Achilles in the first place. And after this, his grandfather then goes on to tell him about King Lycaon and his two sons, which from here goes on to show Kane the family lineage of his attackers, as well as the history of lycanthropy. Because many years ago, King Lycaon attempted to trick Zeus into eating human flesh, but Zeus didn't find the trick so funny. So he punished King Lycaon and his sons by turning them into werewolves, cursing them to forever thirst for human flesh. And as the history is told, Achilles joined the war to get rid of the Lycan bloodline, since most of the Trojan royal family were descendants of King Lycaon. And at the time, Achilles was aided by Athena, who appeared to him in the form of an eagle and given him silver to use against the Trojans. And it worked well for a while, until eventually it was used on him. But then this all comes together when he tells Kane about the letter from Odysseus that speaks of a Trojan priestess who not only did Achilles love, but she was also carrying his child. And this letter went on to establish their order, with it also speaking of a prophecy that said that one day the gods would send a warrior born with the strengths of a werewolf while being able to retain his human form and without the vulnerabilities to silver. And this warrior would go on to facilitate peace and cooperation with the human race, but most significantly and most importantly, he would go on to destroy King Lycaon's bloodline forever. And he even goes on to tell Kane that the men who had been pursuing him, they are the descendants of King Lycaon, and their one goal since the dawn of time had been to control humanity and force them to bend a knee. And I gotta say, with hearing this part, it really explains how these modern day descendants of Lycaon have such a tight hold in the corporate space. But from here, with Kane's grandfather teaching him the history, as well as showing him through the armory, Kane takes a liking to one of the shotguns, but he tells his grandfather, if they sawed off the end, not only would it be more effective, but it would also be easier to use in close quarters. But right away, the two of them modify it together, and his grandfather shows him how to make silver bullets, to where then he lets Kane keep it. But after this long day, and Kane really getting a whole lot of information in such a short time, he then leaves from here to make his way back home. But not long after he makes his way back home, there's a knock on the door and he's got another visitor. But this time it's McKenna, the girl he had seen at the Bulldog Saloon. And she's come to let Kane know that not only was she a friend of Sotera, but she was at the saloon the night of the attack. And it's for that reason that she knows who these men were. But also, as it turns out for McKenna, there's a lot more that goes into her story that unfolds not only in the Kane series, but also in her own series. And I have more information on that in the description down below. But with McKenna arriving here, it's here where she tells Kane that these men work for Global Corp, the company that owns the mines, but mining is only one of the industries that they're involved in. Because Global Corp is also involved in timber and fresh water sourcing, the list goes on. But throughout this conversation, McKenna also informs Kane that Global Corp has a timber operation in Costa Rica. But for Kane, with him hearing all of this, he wants to know that McKenna is 100% sure and that she's absolutely positive that these are the men from the bar before he makes his next move. And initially McKenna's like, what do you mean make a move? What exactly do you have planned? But Kane then reiterates that it's a yes or no question. And right away McKenna tells him, yes, she's sure. And it's here where Kane connects the dots and he asks McKenna if Global Corp is in Costa Rica searching for an ancient artifact to help them with whatever that mystery is underneath the mountain. And in response, she tells him yes, she thinks so, but then she grabs his hand and tries to tell him that she's sorry about what happened with Solterra and she wishes that she could have done more, but there were just so many of them at the bar, and there's some fights that you just can't win alone. But in this moment, suddenly Kane hears a vehicle approaching the cabin from far, so he grabs his bow and he tells McKenna to grab whatever weapon she can and stay inside, and stay hidden. And even still for McKenna, she doesn't hear anything. But Kane got that super hearing, so he steps outside telling McKenna to stay hidden while he goes to handle it. And as Kane goes outside, it's here where we find that it's a group of mercenaries that have made their way here. But when these guys show up, it's quickly where they find out that not only is Kane capable, but also that he has a number of traps laid out off the beaten path that these guys just walk right into. To where from there, Kane's letting off with his bow, which is knocking dudes off their feet, pinning them to trees. And in the meantime, McKenna has found herself a nice little spot on the roof to where she just switches to infrared and she's just picking these guys off. And with the mercenaries' numbers going down rapidly, Kane then goes to take out the last two by getting up close and personal. But when one of these guys makes his way inside the cabin, he just starts tearing up the roof, shooting blind just under McKenna, forcing her to jump off. And at this point, with McKenna falling in the bushes just outside the window, the merc then spots her outside like she's an easy target. But at this point, Kane made his way back in, and he creeps up behind this guy like something out of a horror movie, only to then get to chopping on him like something out of a horror movie. But from here, Kane then goes to check on McKenna and make sure she's alright. But at this point, the two of them are well aware that they've got to grab what they can and leave this cabin because too many people are finding Kane way too easily. So it's here where Kane grabs his things and the two of them saddle up and they head over to McKenna's place in town. And Kane lets her know that as soon as the morning comes, he knows a safe place where they can go. But in the meantime, with the two of them being all covered in mud and mercenary blood, it's here where McKenna's like, you know what, let's go get cleaned up. And I mean, from here, they get cleaned up, but they get a little dirty again, but then they get cleaned up. But really for the two of them, this was their moment not only to catch their breath, to of course then lose it again, but this was a moment between the two of them where they got a hot minute to celebrate their first team up victory. But then the next morning at the crack of dawn, Kane takes McKenna to meet his grandfather Bert, but this time they took her truck instead of horseback. But with them coming here, McKenna shares with Bert that she knows that the men who came to the bar were from Global Corp, as well as the details about Global Corp having an operation in the Costa Rican jungle. But with hearing this, Kane's grandfather is outraged, and he tells the two of them that just as he feared, those guys are getting closer to their goal, and they took his family away from him once, and he's not going to let that happen again. And with saying this, he then goes on to tell them that they're all about to take a trip to Costa Rica. But in response, Kane's kind of like, I ain't got the money for a trip. Because as it stands, he can't really go back to his job at the mines. But his grandfather walks away and he's more or less like, look, I told you before, you have more than you know. So gather whatever things you need because the plane takes off at 1800. But just moments later, we see Kane take McKenna for a walk, heading down through the secret staircase, showing her the paintings and all the different artifacts as they make their way to his grandfather's workshop. And really it's here through the course of this time where they begin to bond even closer, with Kane first showing her through his grandfather's collection and his family history, to where now he's showing her how to make silver bullets. And after they're done, the heat cranks up again and they're back at it. But leading up to the time for them to leave for Costa Rica, McKenna tells Kane that there's something that she needs to let him know. But just after she says this, they get an announcement telling them that Kane's grandfather's ready to go, and Kane responds like, sure, we'll be right down. But then when Kane asks McKenna what she was going to say, she then tells Kane that it can wait and she'll tell him later. But moments after, when they're suited up and waiting in the lobby, they see the silhouette of a wolf coming downstairs. And initially they're startled, but just moments later they come to realize that it's just Grandpa Bert. But with him doing this, it's here where he more or less tells them that now that his cards are all on the table, it's time to make their way and enjoy this trip. But also I gotta say, in this moment, I think it was very appropriate for Grandpa to make this kind of entrance, because imagine if Grandpa wolfed out in Costa Rica and for whatever reason McKenna wasn't paying attention to the tour and she turned around and popped him one time with a silver bullet, then that would have been a problem. But now that she's fully informed and a part of the team, everybody's good to go. But that'll do it for this one, guys. I got all the links down in the description where you can get issues 1 through 3, as well as any of the merch and other issues that tie in. But with that said, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.